We'll first hear from Professor Duijzings' lecture titled Spaces of Peripheralization, Extractivism, Pollution and Environmental Future in Southeastern Europe, followed by a short Q&A. And directly after that, we'll learn from Miloš Đurović about his photography exhibition, which is also on display on the second floor of our building. And this exhibition zooms into the context of North Montenegro, illuminating extractivist practices and the issue of air pollution. Many thanks again to both of you for accepting our invitation and for joining us tonight. And tonight's event has been initiated and co-organized by members of our Research Area 7, Politics of Space, particularly Ivana Dinic. And we are glad that this has also provided an opportunity to collaborate again with our colleagues from JLU's Colloquium Eastern European History. And in a second, I will be joined by Ivana Dinic, who will elaborate on this a bit further. But before I hand over to her, for introduction of our speakers, also allow me to add, as always, just a few notes on tonight's format. Directly after the lecture, there will be a chance for a brief Q&A. And for those of you who are joining us online during the Q&A, if you would like to pose a question or make a comment, please just enter a plus in the chat and we'll be happy to add you to the list. However, if you prefer, you may also just write your question or comment directly in the chat, and we'll be happy to read it out for you. And tonight's event will be recorded. The recording, however, is limited to the audio and video of our presenters only. The recording does not include the Q&A session, neither does it include any chat activity or any metadata regarding the participants of this session. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ger Duijzings, Miloš Đurović, as well as Ivana Dinic, who is going to share some words of introduction. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone, from my part as well. My name is Ivana Dinic, and as a doctoral candidate here at the GCSE since October last year, I have this privilege and the honor, also in the name of my research area, which I'm co-speaker for, so the Research Area 7, and on behalf of my dear colleagues Ger Duijzings and Anna Ivanova, who were of great support in organizing this entire event, to introduce to you a bit more in detail our two distinguished speakers of the evening, starting from Professor Dr. Ger Duijzings, who is a full professor of social anthropology with a regional focus on Southeastern Europe at the University of Regensburg. And before his appointment in Regensburg in 2014, he worked as a director of the Center for Southeast European Studies at the UCL, University College London, and he was also the appointed court expert for the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, so he possesses extensive research insights in the conflicts in the former Yugoslav region, but most recently, he has been focusing on urban transformations in post-socialist cities, which is where actually his research intersects with what we have been particularly focusing within our Research Area 7. And today, he's going to share some of the novel insights from actually a project he is leading in Regensburg. It's called Seafield, so small but fertile field, strengthening Southeast European studies in Regensburg. And he is focusing, as introduced by Jens already, on this process of peripheralization in the region that happens despite or even within the realm of European integration, and thereby produces very interesting geopolitical consequences, and we hope to hear more about it. And just briefly mentioning some of his numerous publications, maybe we could mention the most recent one, If Cars Could Walk, Post-Socialist Streets in Transformation, then engaging with historical traumas, experiential learning and pedagogies of resilience, but also engaged urbanism, cities, and methodologies. And as you can already maybe hear from these titles, he also possesses expertise, including ethnographic methods and socially engaged contemporary art forms, particularly performance, video, and documentary film, and fosters collaboration between social sciences, humanities, and arts. And this is something we are very committed to at the GCSE as well. And coming to our second distinguished speaker of this evening, you will see many of the interests interact and intersect, and so no wonder that Miloš, who is currently a doctoral candidate in social anthropology at the Graduate School for East and Southeast European Studies in Regensburg, is supervised for his PhD by Professor Dr. Ger Duijzings. And Miloš's research actually tackles the long-standing issue of air pollution in the coal mining town of Pljevlja at the periphery of Montenegro, which constitutionally is an ecological state and an EU candidate member committed to the transition policies of decarbonization. And Miloš holds a bachelor and master degrees in ethnology and anthropology of the University of Belgrade and has already collected valuable university teaching experience both in Montenegro but also in France. And some of his academic artistic interventions include the authorship of the exhibition that was mentioned by Jens, that we will cordially invite you to have a look at in the aftermath of this lecture, and it's entitled Extractivism, Pollution and the Future of Pljevlja in Photography. But he also has taken part in the co-authorship of the Queer Dream book. It's a very interesting publication. I invite you to check out. It's in open access. And finally, I would like to extend our gratitude and thanks to the Oberseminar Oost-Europese Geschichte, who partnered with us on this event and who is helping us highlight this region in academic and also all sorts of other debates within Germany and beyond. So thank you so much, and without further ado, I will invite Professor Dr. Ger Duijzings to join us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ivana, for this nice introduction. Also, thanks very much for inviting me here. At this, I think, very nice event. I'm satisfied to see this kind of event happening because I believe that there's actually an urgency to it. Yeah, so working on the environment, I believe, is something that hasn't been done so much in the framework of Southeast European studies. There are some exceptions, of course, one of which is Miloš now. But there's actually not so much research around, yeah, on environmental issues dealing, I mean, in the context of Southeastern Europe. So Miloš is going to present his work later. I mean, on the town of Pljevlja in Montenegro, state, as Ivan already said, is that became, let's say, the first ecological or declared ecological state in the world, but in some ways actually made a mockery out of this. Yeah, as one journalist, Samir Kajošević, basically wrote not so long ago, a journalist working for the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, BIRN. So I won't say much about this. About Montenegro. I'm sure Miloš will talk about that and talk us through the research and the exhibition with these wonderful images that he has also produced during his fieldwork. Let me just briefly perhaps start with reminding you of a few examples, of other examples that have been in the media recently. Where the developments, let's say, in terms of the environmental developments, run kind of contrary to declared policies. I will argue, and this will be happening throughout my talk, I will be arguing that all of this has very clear spatial aspects, revolving around this relationship between centers and peripheries, which exist at all scales. So from the local to the national, to the international and the transnational. So I think all of these scales I would like to address in my talk. Generally, centers are, I would argue, offloading environmental issues or problems onto peripheries, which I'd like to call kind of the legal twilight zones, yeah, or spaces of peripheralization, where all the nice policies that we have in Europe are suspended because these are zones that are kind of out of sight. there is a good expression for the displacement and the making invisible of these problems. Not in my not in my backyard. The NIMBY acronym, which you probably know, which means somebody else has to deal with these issues. These zones, I would argue, are not so distant and detached from us as we may want to believe. We're closely involved in all of this, even if we refuse to see the environmental issues to which we actually contribute. I would say part of the problem all of this is the othering and the exoticization of the spaces of peripheralization in terms of the common stereotypical narratives that we all know pertaining to Southeastern Europe as a region with problems, a region with corruption, with pollution, where we in the West do things right and are the ones that can teach those in the region, the authorities in the region, how to overcome these issues. So what I'm trying to say actually is European players and the established EU member states are part of the problem, as they are implicated in producing these intricate problems that we find locally in Southeastern Europe and that extend across boundaries. So just a few examples, and I'm sure most of you who have who are following the news in Southeastern Europe know of these cases. So it's the first case I'm mentioning here is the lithium mining in Serbia. You probably know last year a previously stalled plan to start lithium mining in the Jadar Valley in Serbia. They were again relaunched after Serbia's constitutional court removed the obstacles because of a huge European demand for lithium, which is needed for the car industry, particularly based in Germany, of course. Instead of addressing the environmental concerns that this type of mining has triggered amongst the population, former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and the EU Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, Maroš Šefčovič, visited Belgrade last July to sign a strategic partnership on the exploitation of these raw materials with Serbia. I can't think actually of a better summary of the situation than this post by my colleague and friend from London, Eric Gordy, who posted on Blue Sky this sentence. The EU, man, you tell them democracy is one of the values in their charter. They say, yeah, sure, but hey, look at that nice lithium. This is, I would say, the best summary I can imagine of what these policies entail, really. How else to interpret it than that European environmental and democratic standards are suspended for the sake of Europe's energy transition, for which Vucic's authoritarian regime has to stay in power. As for the EU's environmental standards, despite declarations that lithium mining is going to happen according to the highest European standards, it is a fact, and it remains a fact, that Serbia is not part of the EU. And this means that Rio Tinto, the corporation that's going to do the exploitation, is not bound to stick to any of these rules when extracting these crucial raw materials. Where are the legal incentives? I think they're nowhere. This shows that there is a dark side of the renewable energy transition. The demand for lithium is affecting vulnerable communities, first of all, and regions, calls to regulate and establishing sustainable mining are, in my view, meaningless if no clear measures are taken. And the hidden costs of all of this are externalized on these communities. A second example is the Vlora airport, which you might perhaps not have heard of, but this is something that is actually very topical at the moment. The airport has just been opened, I think 2 weeks ago. It's an airport that is located near the Vjosa River and the Nata Lagoon, both important nature reserves which have been sacrificed to build this airport, facilitating the booming Albanian tourist industry and boosting property development, which is led, for example, by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The airport's construction has raised serious environmental concerns due to its proximity to the Vjosa River and the Nata Lagoon, which are critical habitats for migratory birds. Environmentalists argue that the airport will disrupt this ecosystem and be in breach of biodiversity protection laws. Also here, German and local political and business interests have converged. So as perhaps some of you know, Munich Airport has been a partner in all of this. It has had was involved in an advisory role, whatever this means. The shareholders of Munich Airport are the Free State of Bavaria with 51%, the Federal Republic of Germany 26%, and Bavaria's capital Munich with 23%. The airport, as already said, opened a few weeks ago. The latest news is that Munich Airport has withdrawn from this project after helping to realize it. We're not sure why this has happened, but you can perhaps draw your own conclusions. A third example is one that shows that Southeastern Europe is a playground for other investors as well. So this third example doesn't involve Europe, but China, and concerns the acquisition of the Bor copper mine in eastern Serbia by the Chinese state-owned firm Zijin. Yet another example, I would say, of extractivism and predatory capitalism without respect, it has been reported, let's say, for labor and environmental laws. Around 8,000 Chinese workers have been flown in, with China enjoying some degree of extraterritorial powers in Bor, meaning that, for instance, it's a Chinese police force that is active in this town. Serbian or some Serbian laws are not valid here anymore. Before I start with my own main example, I would like to reflect a bit more on this concept of peripheralization, as I have hinted at before. You all know there is, let's say, a history of Southeastern Europe being an area or a region marked by imperial, post-imperial, post-colonial legacies, the periphery or semi-periphery of centers located outside of the region. I would argue that this positionality is replicated in the current era of EU integration, where the region is seen by many as a periphery of the EU. It is this relationship that needs to be at the center of attention, I think, when analyzing Europe as a political project. The region being a kind of laboratory of EU integration, where the ambivalences and contradictions of EU enlargement continue to play out most saliently. Even if the region is seen as tailing behind, as being backward, its inclusion is crucially important for the success of the process of EU enlargement. And I would argue it can be seen to a certain extent as the underbelly of this European project, where its ideals, or the EU ideals, are put to the test and contentious issues arise that may threaten the European project, such as the peripheralization of large parts of territory in these eastern parts of the EU, where forms of extractivism, and another problem that I would want to point at is this out-migration, which are two of the key challenges that the region is dealing with. So I see this process of peripheralization as a process whereby centers are complicit in producing backwardness or producing problems elsewhere, an idea that the anthropologist Chris Hahn formulated already in the 1990s. This is not my idea. Chris Hahn has also strongly argued for this type of approach. Affecting various peripheries within the EU, I would say it leads to feelings amongst the population, or the general population of countries in Southeastern Europe, feelings of abandonment and resentment, where those who see themselves to be the losers of these European reforms are vying to take back control, opting for populisms of various kinds. Various transfers, let's say imposed by the EU or seen to have been imposed by the EU, like institutional, cultural, technological transfers, are accompanied by forms of, let's say, depletion of resources in the region, including human resources. Thinking of, let's say, nursing personnel or doctors, or others that are attracted to the German labor markets, for example. We can observe that that, for example, the outflow of skilled labor is currently one of the key problems societies in the region are facing. Peripheralization may lead to geopolitical shifts and reorientations towards alternative centers outside of the region. Seen from the European center, let's say, Southeastern Europe may be a periphery, but from a more off-centered perspective shared in the region, it is possible to identify alternative centers outside the EU, which one can realign with, such as Turkey, Russia, and China. Southeastern Europe has always had, I would argue, these multiple exits or inroads into neighboring spaces, and has learned to kind of manipulate and instrumentalize this. Transnational entanglements with competing centers cause frictions, in particular locales, as Anna Tsing has pointed out and theorized in her book Friction, which may be known amongst the anthropologists here. Her case is actually Indonesia, but her work is actually very good, a good source, a good theoretical approach to dealing with developments, very contradictory developments that happen in local sites. These frictions may also release new energies, producing, for example, forms of political activism and social movements. Now I will slowly turn to my own example, Bucharest, where I've been doing fieldwork for many years already, where I would argue we can observe something that I would call waste colonialism. Using examples from my fieldwork in the Romanian capital, I will focus on the local and the transnational waste change and informal practices of collecting, recycling, and incineration of waste in the context of these ongoing processes of Europeanization. This involves centers and peripheries at different scales, from the local one, the city of Bucharest, let's say, to transnational one. It is very important, in my view, to think of these phenomena in a multiscalar fashion. So I'll try also to show that in my analysis. There are inherent tensions between the Europeanization of waste regimes in a country like Romania and the informal trade in waste and recyclable materials that occur not only at the local level within the city of Bucharest itself, but also at the transnational level, involving other EU member states such as Germany and Italy. I have pursued in my work two lines of analysis. First of all, the local level. So I look at how local waste pickers collect recyclable and reusable materials such as plastic bottles, for example, metals, scrap metals, and other materials discarded by consumers in the city, but also how they sort waste on the large garbage dumps that exist in Bucharest, but also in other cities like Cluj, for example. At the transnational level, so not the local but the transnational level, I'm looking at how Bucharest, the EU's 6th largest city, deals with waste arriving from other EU countries, such as Italy and Germany. All this must be analyzed in this wider framework of EU policies aiming at reducing landfilling, limiting the emission of greenhouse gases, encouraging the recycling of materials, and bringing about what is in EU jargon called the circular economy. EU environmental policies are part of the process of Europeanization. However, the problem is these policies are often undermined by market pressures, economic pressures to reduce the costs of recycling, the costs of waste treatment. As a result, informal or illegal dumping in less regulated and formalized places and landfills, such as in a country like Romania with less stringent waste regimes, becomes an attractive option, spawning a lucrative, informal and illegal waste trade. So there are these contradictions between EU environmental policies introduced in Southeastern Europe as part of the accession process. So I can mention Chapter 27 of the acquis framework that candidate countries have to fulfill before they can access the EU, and the transnational waste trade, which ships waste produced in the center to the periphery. From the examples I have is from Germany and Italy, or the main exporters to waste to countries like Romania and Albania, for example. The topic of waste, in my view, illustrates the principle that Europeanization does not necessarily lead to a process of convergence. Rather, it gives rise to inequities across and within territories, European territories, for which the term peripherization applies. indeed, a common aspect of waste disposal is that it is usually discarded and recycled and moved out of sight and mind of those who produce it, putting the burden usually on the shoulders of poorer and more marginalized communities. This happens at the local level and it happens at the transnational level. And this often means that waste is dumped, for instance, in the case of Bucharest, at the rural or semi-rural periphery of the city. This happens in many other places in Southeastern Europe, where we, of course, have seen in recent decades a very radical increase in consumerist behavior and an increase in the volumes of waste. This has led to informal practices of collecting, recycling, and incineration of waste by social and ethnic groups that make a living out of this, and in some cases actually live in informal settlements next to the dump sites. Cluj-Napoca is a very good example of this. I actually had a photo of it, but I didn't necessarily want to show it. But it's a very, quite a shocking example of a community living basically on the dump itself and surviving there by sorting out waste. This shifting of waste is not only taking place locally, as I already indicated. Waste produced in the old EU member states is disposed of and shipped to the new EU member states or accession states located at Europe's periphery or beyond as a result of this vast and lucrative international waste trade. Various types of waste are channeled through what I would call transnational waste chains, in which organized crime, in Romania, people talk about the waste mafia, for example, or in Italy as well, which benefits from the corruption in the countries of destination, leading to forms of dirty dumping. Even though the term toxic waste colonialism is no longer commonly used, as the worst excesses of this phenomenon have been tackled through treatises like the Basel Convention, the legal scholar Laura Pratt, you have a text here written by her on this issue, has argued that the effective management of transboundary hazardous waste chains leaves much to be desired. The most important milestone indeed was the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movement of hazardous wastes and their disposal, which came into force in 1992. In 2019, for example, most countries except the United States, of course one of the biggest producers of plastics, agreed to amend the Basel Convention to include plastic waste as a material regulated by this treaty. Over 30 years have passed since the Basel Convention was adopted, with lots of positive results. However, a key problem is that the Basel Convention does not pertain to waste flows within the EU, so within Europe, allowing various loopholes to continue to exist in the current international system of waste governance. One of the problems of the Basel Convention is indeed that it regulates dirty dumping practices between the global north and the global south. And that was the key reason, the key motivation to actually conclude this convention, but not between EU member states, for example. So what we have here is a situation where between centers and peripheries at the local level, such as cities, which brings me to the topic of urban peripheries. This is a phrase where ugly things happen unseen. The phrase on this slide I borrow from the British author and geographer Ian Sinclair, psychogeographer he calls himself, who made an epic journey on foot around the M25, the ring road around London, published as London Orbital. In this monumental book, it's about 600 pages, he argues that a ruthless and predatory capitalism has taken root at London's periphery. I'm using his wording now. Shady businessmen and landfill cowboys have built their wealth through various dubious schemes, making the periphery the place where ugly things happen unseen. Indeed, these ugly things happening unseen can also be found at the peripheries of other large European cities like Rome or Bucharest. There's a certain proclivity amongst centers to close the eyes and look away, refusing to see what happens there, hence also the emphasis on the unseen. I will offer you some insights from my research in various peri-urban sites around Bucharest, zooming in particularly on waste dumps, connecting environmental issues with the issue of the marginalization of particular groups of people like Roma who are pushed to the periphery of a city like Bucharest. One of my assumptions in my research is that waste dumps and urban slums, as they can be found in Bucharest, as can be found in Cluj, for example, are indeed structurally connected. Vulnerable groups such as the Roma become, through their social and spatial marginality, somehow associated with garbage, with waste. Slums in themselves are dump sites of unwanted social categories, often located in the proximity of waste dumps. And it illustrates Sigmund Bauman's point that the byproduct of modernity is waste. Not only physical waste, but also human waste. Populations declared redundant are forced to relocate to the periphery of the city, where they join space with waste dumps. So they join, as it were, the piles of rubbish that are discarded and made to disappear, and the burden is put on the periphery, on these vulnerable communities that exist there, who often live off the recycling of certain materials. What is discarded as waste by affluent consumers becomes a valuable resource for the less affluent who reuse or recycle these materials. Okay. This is a map of the Bucharest ring roads and or the Centura, where I've been doing fieldwork intermittently since 2010, so about 15 years now. And I published an extensive ethnography of the Centura in 2023, so it's now 1.5 years ago, in this book, which I can share with those of you who are interested in it. I can send you a PDF. And in this text, I describe how the Centura should be seen as a residual urban space, a dump site where various inconveniences of urban living, such as waste, such as cemeteries for human and not so human remains, like animals, like cars, landfills, illegal garbage dumps, industrial zones, prisons, archives, and slums are concentrated. Indeed, the ring road is home to numerous disposal sites, as I would call them, the place of choice for various types of waste. A good deal of illegal dumping takes place here too. For example, rubble from various construction sites discarded under the cover of the night. Also, large authorized waste disposal sites or landfills are located at Centura, although environmental activists do fundamentally question the legality of their activities, regarding them as scams of some kind or another. Not only landfills, but also cemeteries, for example, are controlled by corrupt officials and criminal business networks. So apart from having a waste mafia, there's also something that, let's say, in the common parlance of the Bucharest population. My wife is Romanian, so I hear this a lot. People speak about the cemetery mafia. So you see that there is a structural overlap between these sites. At these peri-urban sites, informality is amplified, and informal urbanism is the norm. In the popular imagination, the Centura is seen as seamy, as corrupt, dominated by shady characters and the local mafia. The Centura also stands for a life in transit, with bars, cafes, motels, meeting points for quick, fleeting, cursory, superficial, sometimes illicit meetings. The Centura has also a reputation for being the place for sex work, for example. So in this peri-urban environment, one also finds the two largest landfills of the city of Bucharest. One of them is located in Glina, which is in the southeast of the city, and the other is Rudeni, which is located in the northwest. At the time of my research, they were owned or managed by former members of the communist nomenclatura, with links to the Securitate, in the case of Rudeni in the northwest, or they were owned by Italian businessmen with links to the Camorra. Some of these businessmen were arrested and tried in Italy for money laundering. And these Italian owners of the Glina dump site, the landfill, dumped vast amounts of waste imported from Italy, particularly Naples. Glina has been the largest site around Bucharest, and indeed, let's say, investigative journalists have documented this case very well. There's a book that I think I have here, where two investigative Italian journalists have actually shown how this business works for the case of Glina in Bucharest. This site has been managed in close cooperation with the mayor of the commune at Bucharest periphery, where the large landfill is located. In more recent years, the other landfill in the northwest, Rudeni, has triggered very wide protests in the north of the city because of the persistent stench caused by the unauthorized and illegal incineration of waste, resulting in extremely high levels of air pollution, one of the highest in the EU. And these incinerations happen particularly at night, as a result of which pollution levels in the northwestern parts of the city have been highest at that time of the day. Not, let's say, at daytime when, let's say, lots of cars drive around. It's particularly in the night the air is polluted most. I have to say, in the last 2-3 years or so, the problem, we have an apartment there, so I know what it means. The local authorities seem to have managed to reduce the problem, but illegal incineration continues elsewhere in Romania. And lots of this waste comes from abroad. So also here the burden of waste comes, coming from Europe, is externalized onto the Southeast European periphery. The waste flows through concrete, in particular local sites, where transnational traders, waste traders, have partners in corrupt government officials and municipal authorities and informal non-state actors. Employing Zsuzsa Gill's concept of waste regimes, which some of you may be familiar with, my understanding is that the transnational waste trade operates along chains of formal and informal waste regimes. So there's a serial connection between different waste regimes. Depending on where the waste is, one particular regime, waste regime, will be will be functioning. Legal loopholes and blind spots, as well as informal networks, are used to take waste from one place to another, where at the end of this chain, if at all, recycling is carried out by waste pickers who live off the waste. The cunning of chaos, a term coined by Joanna Kusiak. I think she's a sociologist or cultural studies person working on Warsaw. This is, of course, a phenomenon that is very hard, extremely difficult to research, because you almost have to work with police investigators or with Interpol or investigative journalists to figure out what's actually happening on the ground. I never managed. I tried to join forces with Bellingcat, for example, which you might know, an investigative journalists collective based in the Netherlands. But it's extremely hard to get a finger on all of this because of lacking transparency, lawlessness, free and even deliberate chaos, which is a kind of a screen. I would like to warn against what Joanna Kusiak has called the cunning of chaos, so the semblance of chaos, which has a cunning. There are patterns between this apparent chaos, pockets of order, as she describes it, that may have become obvious, perhaps to you, as the attentive listener. Writing about Warsaw, Joanna Kusiak observed the frequent use of the word chaos in the immediate post-socialist years as a descriptive shorthand for all the turbulent changes unfolding in a seemingly uncoordinated manner. But she's critical of this facile usage of the trope chaos. Also by many academics, for example, who were kind of fascinated by the rapid transformations and took this apparent chaos at face value. Instead, Kusiak proposes a structural analysis. So she wants to show that social phenomena and power relations are hidden beneath the superficial impression of chaos. And her claim is that empirically, chaos, urban chaos, is never mere randomness, but rather a conglomerate of multiple pockets of order, of power, regulated by non-transparent power relations that only appear to be arbitrary. Hence, the chaos has its cunning. It helps to conceal and camouflage structures of power, and as Ian Sinclair has suggested, the fringes of cities are spaces where, let's say, the casualties of urban life, the inconveniences of urban life are tidied away. It hides, quoting Sinclair, it hides toxic industries. It is used to dump landfill and to provide bunker research stations and safe houses for the secret state, as Sinclair calls it. On the other hand, these urban peripheries are also the zones for comfortable urban or ex-urban living, for elites and new middle classes who live in gated communities, for example, at the periphery of Bucharest, opting out of the perceived chaos of a city like Bucharest. Their comfortable living in gated communities is or maybe undermined by, let's say, these inconveniences that are also located at the periphery of the city, the inconveniences that were displaced from the center to the periphery. Thus, these nice green residential areas, they carry names like Green Town or may be built on illegal toxic waste dumps. Nobody knows for sure. An irony akin to what happened in London, where Ian Sinclair observed and described how toxic dumps have been converted into idyllic villages. The story continues. Here is a Facebook post from Octavian Berceanu, a Bucharest environmental activist who, for a few months in 2021, led the Romanian National Agency for the Environment. He was kicked out soon afterwards because he was actually doing some effective work. The slide shows photos of a dozen or so intercepted containers with illegal waste imported from Germany, including toxic and hazardous waste such as asbestos, which cannot be recycled. It was mixed with municipal waste. Exceptionally, these containers were sent back to Germany. It normally doesn't happen. Thus, this, like my previous example, shows that Germany, a key protagonist of the circular economy, is at the same time implicated or complicit in these dubious practices, actively producing the periphery and this process of peripheralization that I've been describing. So the mechanisms behind this, I would say, is EU policies are partly or are undermined by economic pressures, by market pressures, to reduce the costs of recycling and waste treatment, as a result of which illegal dumping in less regulated and formalized landfills in peripheral cities in the European Union, but also in non-EU countries like Albania, for example, who have less stringent waste regimes, becomes a very attractive option, spawning a lucrative waste trade. It's a global trade. A World Bank report from 2012, so it's already 12 years old, emphasized that waste has become a lucrative transnational commodity that is shifted around the globe in huge volumes. The trade is propelled by the increased volumes of waste, the growing demand for secondary reusable or recyclable materials, and rising prices on the secondary materials markets. Since the various EU policies have considerably raised the costs of waste and pollution, informal and illegal dumping elsewhere have become an attractive option, spawning this waste trade which operates on a transnational scale. And within the EU, I would say this trade is propelled by the disappearing boundaries or borders for goods and the vast cost differentials for waste disposal between wealthier and poorer countries. So it makes sense to bring waste from a wealthy country to a poorer country because you can get rid of the waste much more cheaply. So they have become a cheap alternative to the expensive landfills or recycling centers in wealthier countries. Profits can be maximized when waste is shifted transnationally, as certain types of toxic or hazardous waste can only be disposed of and recycled at a high cost, at least within the EU. Middlemen, traffickers operate transnationally, and they may provide cheap solutions for firms, for example, to get rid of a particular type of waste. For example, as an Interpol report from 2020 shows, hazardous waste may be shipped using false permits, incorrect labeling of what is in a container, for example, and bribes, even under the pretext of recycling. Yeah. The informal transnational waste trade finds, of course, helpers in corrupt customs officials, municipal authorities, and other local informal parties, such as the local mafia. In this context of Europeanization, I would say the term Europeanization means actually two contradictory things. So on the one hand, countries such as Romania and Bulgaria are forced to implement EU policies regarding the processing of waste, bringing them in line with European standards, while curbing informal practices. This type of Europeanization, actually, I haven't talked much about this, but I do think it's something we should be talking about too. This type of Europeanization, formalizing these practices, actually deprives groups such as Roma of their means of subsistence. They're not allowed to do what they've done for generations, let's say, and their existence may be threatened when waste regimes become more regulated, formalized, and professionalized. The other meaning of Europeanization is that countries that are most developed and advanced in terms of recycling, like Germany, dump waste at the periphery, using knowingly or unknowingly the services of criminal networks and organized crime. Countries like Romania and Bulgaria import tons of waste from other EU countries like Germany, which are then illegally dumped or burned, for example, at Bucharest's fringe, causing this very high level of pollution that I've been describing. All of this, in my view, tells us something about Europe and about the structural position Southeastern Europe has as a European periphery, where marginalized populations cannot enjoy a healthy and unpolluted environment. To conclude, I would argue that there is a neglect, a lack of critical engagement with these issues, with the drawbacks of current and ongoing Europeanization processes, which can be called a case of willful blindness. I take this concept from the Dutch anthropologist Matthijs Pelkmans, who worked in Central Asia, Georgia, who talks about deliberate not knowing, in particular in the form of strategic denial of facts used as a tool of governance by those in power. What is known or not known about Eastern Europe or Southeastern Europe through the little research that is done and the massive amount of research that is not done or undone, as he calls it, has something to do with the stark asymmetrical relationships of power between European countries at the center and the EU periphery. A picture emerges in which everyday life at the periphery is almost like a life of perpetual crisis in many ways, a consequence of the depletion of human and natural resources, which many of us do not want to see. So it is ominous, I would say, that there is a lack of environmental studies in Southeastern Europe. Why is that? Is this perhaps also a case of willful blindness? This may be the case, but I think it's a hopeful sign that forms of environmental activism and citizen science are emerging across Southeastern Europe, responding to a wide range of environmental crises and issues, such as the ones I have mentioned at the beginning. An important ingredient or precondition for success to ensure that activists and citizens reflect on the stages of mobilization, let's say, the developments of forms of citizen science, mobilizing also scientific and legal expertise for their environmental justice struggles. And I'm very inspired by this text, which actually doesn't deal with Southeastern Europe, but with Latin America, where the authors focus on the problem of undone science. So forms of vernacular and, promoting forms of vernacular and experiential knowledge, marginalized and dismissed by the authorities and powerful corporate interests. This can be remedied by the systematic advancements of legal and scientific counter-expertise that builds on local and vernacular forms of knowledge, the type of knowledge that Miloš, for example, is gathering. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to answer any questions you may have.